Must be an interesting topic for some conservatives, and this is a conservative conference, so I guess it makes some sense. There's 2 seats here that will be sold to the highest. No, can't sell them. Bathroom break. Okay. We have a distinguished panel here. We are really fortunate. 3 experts on the subject that we're going to talk about. And what's that subject?
Sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary cities. Okay. I hear skepticism out there.
In Alabama, that's where Auburn goes after we beat them.
Shakespeare called this comic relief in preparation for the serious stuff. Now we're going to begin the serious stuff. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to explain what he or she would tell the person who controls the pearly gates. If you get there, and that person, the Mulvaney, God's Mulvaney, ask you, why should I let you through these gates? What are the 3 things, Attorney General Paxton of Texas? You loaded the audience. What are the 3 things you would tell Mulvaney of why you should get into heaven that you've done?
Well, I believe in the grace of God, so I'm going to depend on that above anything I've done. So, do you really want to know what things, as it relates to, okay?
Because I want the audience to know who you are.
Sure. So I would say that the 3 things that I've focused on, one was stopping the Obama administration federal overreach. So we sued the Obama administration 27 times in 27 months. So once a month. And with the goal, obviously, of stopping them from, I think, ruining our Constitution. And what I mean by that, President Obama clearly bypassed Congress, bypassed the courts, bypassed the states, and had we not stopped him, had the states not stepped in and stopped him, I'm convinced that we would be operating under a different Constitution. We'd be post-constitutional, and our presidency would be a lot more powerful than it should be. Another issue that I've really focused on is human trafficking. It is a scourge upon our society, and it's something that I started in my office to try to end human trafficking in our country. We've ended other slavery, other forms of slavery in this country, and we should do the same thing with human trafficking.
He got national, and I would say international recognition for what he did on this. Am I right?
Well, we've done our best. We have a small group of people. It was something that I really have cared about and continue to care about, and will continue to fight. And then I would say, I have a mix on this one. We might have sued the government over Obamacare a couple of times, and we actually, a lot of people don't know this. We were successful. Only 5 states sued with me. They had created this tax on states, and I couldn't talk a lot of my other state AGs into suing because I guess they didn't think we were going to win. And we were successful. The 6 states that sued, we got a judgment from a federal court, for almost $1 billion. It was 800 and something million that we get to split Texas. And the great thing about that is we are no longer, the 6 states that did that are no longer subject to this Obamacare tax that was unconstitutional. The other 44 states, you probably live in one, are subject to that tax. And then secondly, we sued over the actual Obamacare. We have won at federal district court. We've won at the Fifth Circuit on the individual mandate. We're now dealing with individual pieces of the law, and I think ultimately we're going to be successful in handing that issue back to the states and to Congress to deal with, as opposed to us, as opposed to Congress, as opposed to what happened, which was Congress ordering every one of us to buy health care insurance, which they don't have the authority to order you to do anything or buy anything.
Perfect.
How's that?
Does that get him in Does that get him through the pearly gates, you think? All right, Congressman Mo Brooks is famous for all the things that he has accomplished over a long, long service to America, to his community, to his state, and to the central government of the United States of America. But here you are at the pearly gate, and you're going to get these 3 questions. What are you going to say?
Well, I'm going to be entirely different than the last answer. I'm going to say I was a pretty good son, a pretty good husband and father, a great grandfather, and my wife used to work on Bear Bryant's tax return. So if you don't mind, we have an appointment with him. We're coming on in.
Was that 3? We should call that 3? Satisfactory? Congresswoman, I can't wait to hear what Mrs. Black has to say to Mulvaney, God's gatekeeper.
Wow, Mulvaney, God's gatekeeper.
Is that
Now,
Mick Mulvaney?
Mick Mulvaney.
Mick Mulvaney.
So,
I'm not sure we're talking about
he's
the pearly
acting,
gates, are we?
He's acting. He's only acting. Yeah.
Well, I should add, Mick, good to see you again. And I enjoyed beating you back on all those open borders policies you tended to advocate.
Whoa.
So first of all, Mick and myself and Mo all came in at the same time in 2010. We were part of that big wave. Amen? Amen. That was a pretty big wave, and wouldn't we like to see that wave again this time to take back the House of Representatives?
Amen.
So I'm probably going to say to Mick, number one, is that I hope that what I was able to do during my nursing career over the last 48 years in taking care of people will give me at least 1 foot in heaven. I hope the second one is my grandchildren, that they're going to say that I'm the best Mimi in the world. And the third is my service, both at the state level and the federal level, in whatever little piece I played in some of the good legislation. Most importantly, the legislation to save babies in the pro-life arena. And thank you for that. And thank goodness we have a president now who honors life and is one that wants to continue the good work that was done over the last 10 years in pushing forward on saving babies' lives.
All right, I'm pronouncing you in. I'm not even going to check with them.
Oh, thank you.
You're done. Okay. The problem with the, what do you call the cities that are called? What?
Sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary. What does that mean? Why are they called sanctuary?
I think it's because they are willing to ignore federal law and basically not turn over people that they may have arrested for other things to the federal government for violations of immigration law.
Right.
How's that?
And is that part of the? Is this? Can you all hear me now? Okay. Is that part of federal law? I mean, what happens is that the local jurisdiction holds someone for some purported crime, wife beating, drunken driving, whatever, and the person is an illegal alien, and so the local jurisdiction is about to. This hurts. The local jurisdiction is about to release this person. The federal authorities request DEA, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE division, requests that the local jurisdiction detain that person for an extra 48 hours while ICE gets a wagon over there to pick up this illegal alien. The locals are saying, wait a minute, we don't have to do that. There's no law that says we have to do that. I think you may not agree, but I checked the law and I think they're right. The law doesn't say, the federal law doesn't say that the local jurisdiction must hold that person on the request of the federal government for up to 48 hours. It says it may. It has the authority. It's at its discretion. Is that the case, Mrs. Black?
I think you're right on that, and I think that's been where the confusion has been. Previous to what has happened over the last several years with all these sanctuary cities, we as American people said this is illegal. And our authorities also said it was illegal. It is really just under the previous administration that we have had this big problem of saying maybe there is not a clarification there. And I actually believe that that's one of the roles and responsibilities that should be played within the Congress is to make this clear, to
That's
make
what I
it
want to
clear
hear,
that is
that the members
illegal.
of Congress here take responsibility for doing that. Thank you. Mo, how do you feel about this?
Well, I think Diane pretty much covered it. The thing that I would like to emphasize is if y'all are going to do what you want, and if you're going to injure American citizens in that process, say goodbye to your money and thank goodness for Donald Trump.
Hear, hear. what is it about immigrants and immigration that makes people who supported Brexit, for example, people who support Trump and support essentially where we stand on the whole subject of immigration, and particularly these terrible cities, what do they call it again? Sanctuary cities. That's a good word. Sanctuary is good. You want to have sanctuary, right? But what's the problem here? It's like we don't like Mexicans, or we don't like Bolivians, or we don't like, I don't know, Belgians. No, no, this is off the record, right? Nobody's going to talk about this outside this room, because I don't want to be quoted. I know you. Let's just see how these guys feel. Latin America's. You can't hear still.
You have to hold it close to your mouth.
But you're not pressing anything.
You have to almost put it on your lips.
It works when it's like
Don't
this.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, there's good.
Oh,
It's a unidirectional microphone, so you have to hold it into your mouth.
okay.
If you hold it like this, it doesn't work. If you hold it like this, it works. Okay.
I have a computer at home. Don't use it, but I have it. Okay.
You're doing well right now. Oh, you moved it too far away?
Oops.
There you go.
I take directional well. Okay. So where was I? So all of Latin America, from the time I was born, was going to come of age, because everybody told me, including everybody in Latin America, that there's enough natural resources there and enough talent to do what the United States does in the way of successful income. It never happened. Why did it never happen? Because it's not your fault. It's not your fault, and it's certainly not your fault. When those people come here from any of the Latin American countries, come to a really free, relatively honest, relatively uncorrupt society, they flourish. They become scientists. They become business people. They flower. Well, not all of them, but some of them do. What's the difference? The difference is that if we let everybody in from cultures that don't have our values, don't have our traditions, we fear that we'll wind up the way they are. It's a legitimate fear. It's not public. It's not politically correct to talk about.
I think he's trying to get a rise out of everybody.
But, well, tell me, what's the problem with that?
Well, we have the most generous and compassionate lawful immigration system on the planet. Okay, that's the basis. And by way of example, citizenship, the highest honor you can give to a foreign-born individual. We give more citizenships to more foreign-born individuals than any other country on earth, and we almost, in many years, give as many as every other country on the earth put together. So when we're talking about illegal immigration, we're talking about a group of people whose first act on American soil is to spit on our laws and our Constitution. Now, there's more to it than just that. Our job is to promote America. We are Americans, okay? And the people who come here lawfully, to the extent they get citizenship, they also are Americans, and they deserve the same kind of protections that everybody else does. But these illegal aliens are doing a lot, and by the way, illegal aliens, that's the statutory term. Don't let somebody beat you off that. That is the name. And illegal aliens, I ran through some federal government data, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement data for fiscal year 2018, just to give you an idea as to how many Americans have been victimized who would not have been victimized if we'd had proper border security in FY 2018. Over 2,000 dead Americans victims of homicides by illegal aliens that would be alive, but for our porous southern border in these sanctuary cities. 50,000+ assaults, 12,000+ burglaries, over 12,000 sexual assaults and offenses, over 5,000 robberies, and over 2,000 kidnappings. Those are a lot of Americans who would not have been victimized or terrorized if we enforced our laws and if the sanctuary cities would give sanctuary to us rather than people who should not be here. Now, that's just a part of it. You've got the economic impact. George Borjas, who's a Harvard economics professor type, talks about the surge in the labor supply that depresses wages for blue-collar workers approximately $2,000 per year. That's damage to the least among us who need the greatest amount of help, not counting the jobs lost because illegal aliens have taken them. Now, how many are there? 11 million, according to the Census Bureau. Yale says 23, 24 million. I tend to believe it's higher. Then you've got the political impact. 23 million illegal aliens, that's the equivalent of about 30 congressional seats and 30 electoral college votes. That's political power. That's what it's all about. And that power is shifting from us who obey the law to those states that don't. And they're trying to remake our country. They're trying to make us a socialist nation, and illegal aliens are a big part of that. We could go on and on and on, but we have to take our country back, and one of the first steps is making sure that that line on a map, that border has meaning, and it has no meaning when the socialist Democrats do what they're doing to it.
Okay, Congresswoman, I know you're itching to respond. Please go ahead.
Well, I'm all with Mo, and Mo and I have served together, and we have certainly tried under the previous administration to get some good things put in law to stop this illegal immigration. And I applaud the president for what he's doing, where he is building a barrier. How many of you have been on the border to see that you see people coming right over the border? And I know that you can certainly talk about that, Attorney General Paxton. But I remember one time I had the opportunity to be able to go down there, and we were standing on the Rio Grande. And the part of the Rio Grande that we were standing on literally was just maybe double the size of the length of this room. It was so easy for people just to walk across the shallow piece to come into our country. Now, look, we all know of people who came here legally. They came here legally wanting to be a part of the United States of America, and they're good people. But when they're coming here illegally, they're not always coming here for the right reason. There are, of course, mules that bring people with a different thought about what they're going to get when they get to the border, that they're going to be able to come across the border. But we need to stop this flowing across the border, and I'm interested to hear what our Attorney General says about his look, because he's right there at the border seeing what's happening. But when jobs are being taken, and even in my own community just recently, I was speaking to a gentleman that put some plumbing in our house, and I said, why are you no longer in the plumbing business? And he said, I can't afford to compete against somebody who's here illegally. And that is a real problem when we're starting to put our own people out of business and we're not getting the quality of the service. So it is a huge issue, and I applaud again the president for what he's doing, but he also needs the Congress to be behind him to make sure that these laws are changed to address these issues that we have already talked about, and many more.
Mr. Attorney General.
So let me first say, we actually do have laws in Texas that outlaw sanctuary cities. So even if the federal law doesn't, in Texas, a few years ago, the legislature passed a law basically banning sanctuary cities, because we had between 5 and 10, including the Travis County Sheriff, Sally Hernandez, used to let people go, and so we passed a law. And so literally I'm responsible for enforcing that law. We've only had so far one case where we've actually had to go after the police chief of San Antonio, who released 12 illegals who were being transported. He let them go, put them with a...
One case, how long?
What's that?
How long? One case and how long?
Well, that happened about a year ago. So how long? What do you mean? Oh, got it. Anyway, so it has been effective in Texas in stopping sanctuary
We
cities.
just want to make sure your record, is correct with what you say. It's
But I do want to talk about something
my minder.
that Diane said. You said I've been on the border, and I want to tell a little story. We were there probably a year ago, and we were on horses riding along the border, and my communications director, Mark Rylander, who's out in the audience, wave your hand, Mark. Literally, there was an illegal running by me, tackled him. Mark tackled an illegal alien. Is that not right?
Let's give him a big hand. Woo, Mark. Thank you, Mark.
San Antonio.
And he's here to live to tell the story, although I will say he got away. So Mark didn't keep him. So anyway.
if you'd played football at Alabama, that wouldn't have happened.
I don't really have a comeback for that. But I will say, it is a serious problem. I've been down there several times. I've been on boat. I've been on horseback. I've walked along the border. And we never had a president before this who I think took it as seriously as we needed to. And you go down and talk to border agents and you see the drugs coming across, the human trafficking, you talk about people that have been killed, you talked about statistics, those are real lives. And when you meet families that have lost somebody because of unnecessary, where we haven't enforced the law and they have a loved one who's died, this becomes a real issue to you. And so it is not just statistics, it is literally talking to people that have lost somebody. It's hard to do.
I want to follow up with you for a second. What is it that, when you think of the people who pass and enforce sanctuary laws, protecting illegals, and you think about patriotism and Americanism, what goes through your head?
Well, I think the congressman has it right. I mean, there's a strategy here that involves votes and changing our country, and I think it's not the appropriate way to change our country. We have an election process of citizens voting, and if we lose that in states like Texas, we are not going to be the same nation. It's not going to be the same country.
Well, okay, I'll move.
Can I follow up on that just for a second,
Yeah.
where he talked about citizens voting? Y'all need to understand where the socialists want to take us. There are many places in America right now where it is legal under local law for an illegal alien to register to vote and vote. Okay, and they're all controlled by the Socialist Democrats. The largest such community is San Francisco. That's what they want to do. They want to take our own government from us. So it's citizens, lawful immigrants, and illegal aliens are all entitled to register to vote and vote. Now, they're supposed to only vote in those municipal elections. Now, why those people would want to give up their own communities as citizens to non-citizens, I don't know. I can't fathom that. They probably got tricked in some shape, form, or fashion. But I have to wonder how often in general elections for state offices or federal offices like President of the United States, when an illegal alien or a lawful immigrant comes in with their voter registration card with a little wink, wink, nod, nod, how often do they vote there when they're not supposed to? And how many elections have been stolen? Nobody knows. But this is a concern, and if the Socialist Democrats have their way, they're going to do that across the country. That's where they're headed, folks, and we know that because that's where they have gone in places where they have that total control.
Well, it's hard for me to get you to say how you really feel on these things, but I'm gonna try. When you look at these people, do you think you can make a case? Remember in the old days we used to say, none dare call it treason, and then whisper, but it is. Is this seditious?
Well, in my judgment, maybe it's treasonous, maybe seditionist. I really haven't looked at the definitions of those terms. It may be there, it may not be, but it ought to be criminal because they're aiding and abetting criminal activity, and they ought to be prosecuted. Now I say that
Why is it, Congressman, that this late into the conservative era that, let's say, began, I think probably began with Ronald Reagan, certainly didn't begin with Richard Nixon, began with Ronald Reagan. This late into it, we're still wondering why there's no such prosecution. Why?
you have laws that have loopholes that you could drive Mack trucks through. And the reason that we have loopholes, of course, on the left, they have a political strategy. But on the right, you've got the United States Chamber of Commerce. You've got agricultural interests. They want cheap foreign labor in our communities regardless of how they get here. And so those are powerful political institutions that result in a lot of our Republicans who should be for law and order kind of looking the other way or helping to pass legislation that enables illegal aliens to come into our country and inhibits us from deporting them. So you've got a two-prong attack. One is on the left, which you expect, but within our own ranks, the United States Chamber of Commerce, look it up. Cheap foreign labor is and has been their number one priority, and they spend tens of millions of dollars per election cycle making sure that open borders type Republicans are elected in our primaries. I mean, the Gang of Eight amnesty bill, half of that eight was Republican folks, Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio. So be mindful of how important it is that we pay more scrutiny to who we are nominating in our Republican primaries so we aren't so often disappointed by the kind of impasse we see in Washington where we scratch our heads wondering why our own people aren't keeping their promises. That's why we're not doing our jobs well enough in those primary battles, and we're letting money sway us, money that is motivated by greed and self-interest rather than national interest.
Congresswoman, which part of that do you dispute?
Well, I do agree with Mo. I think there's one thing we talked about, however, Ralph, before we came in, and that's the number of folks that come here under an educational visa. And how many people are here illegally who have overstayed that visa. And we don't have a good system with even knowing who they are or where they are. And the illegal immigrants that we hear about and Mo is speaking about, we know and hear about that all the time. But there's also a large group of people that are here illegally who have overstayed their visa, and we don't really have a good system for knowing where they are or what they're doing or what kinds of trouble they may be also causing. So that's another whole issue that is not really talked about very often, and it's not very transparent.
Congressman Brooks, why is that not talked about?
That's a very good question. I don't know the exact numbers, and I'm not sure anybody in the federal government knows the exact numbers because we're not keeping the data that
About
we need in order
two-thirds
to know
now.
those numbers. I've heard the estimate of about a half, but it might be 2/3. By way of example, a few years ago when we were in charge of the House and the Senate and the White House, I tried to get legislation through, and I couldn't get it through the Judiciary Committee that we were supposed to control that would have required the kind of reporting system to the FBI where we'd actually have data on how bad the problem is. Each year we have a Crime in America pamphlet or book that is published by the FBI and the Department of Justice, and I wanted to know how many of these crimes are being committed by illegal aliens or lawful immigrants and American citizens. And we were blocked.
Why,
Because
and by
the
who?
other side doesn't want us to know what the truth is.
But you had control of the House. Why? I don't understand. How could you be blocked by your own party?
Well, I think I covered
Has that ever happened before?
Follow the money. Follow the money. There are lots of industries and lots of businesses that utilize cheap foreign labor. They don't want to hire American workers at market rates or living wage rates. And this is the way they get around that. And they spend a lot of money to make sure that they are successful at doing it.
Can I add a state perspective to this?
I wish you would.
So we had a case.
What state again?
The big one. We had a case a few years ago that the Supreme Court was called Arizona v. U.S. And what the Supreme Court said, because Arizona was frustrated with Congress and not getting enough immigration reform and laws in place that would prevent illegal immigration. And obviously these congressmen cared about it, but there were many that did not. And so Arizona passed their own laws trying to stop illegal immigration. And they were told by the Supreme Court this is a federal issue, and their laws were struck down. And so in places like Texas and Arizona, we feel handcuffed because we're watching people come across our border illegally with, as I said, human trafficking, drugs, crime. And obviously not everybody's coming across to do that, but we have enough problems that we need to stop, and yet we're handcuffed because we're told that we can't act. And we have believed all along that if Congress abdicates that responsibility, why should we be prevented from protecting our borders? And that's the position that we're in. That would be the argument that we would make. If Congress doesn't do it, why can't we step into that role? It can't just be that it's their role if they're not doing anything about it. And it's a frustration on the state level that we have to sit back and do nothing.
If I might add something on that, there is a provision in the United States Constitution where the states can engage in self-help when the federal government does not stop an invasion. Now, I don't remember what provision in the Constitution it is. Someone who
I think it's
has
Article 5.
Okay. Declare it an invasion and see what the courts say at that point. Because that's what it is. It's an invasion.
You know, there's certainly that. What's that? There's certainly that theory out there that it would take an act of one of our governors to do that, to see how that would be tested in the Supreme Court, because clearly that would be.
Well, do it fast. We have a 5-4 majority.
Hopefully that's going to get better.
Well, we sort of have a 5-4 majority.
Ralph, if I may
Yes,
just
please.
weigh in just briefly here, because I know that when our class came in 2010, we had that majority, and people do say, why didn't you do something? And I think you would be surprised about how many things were passed in the House, but were not able to get passed in the Senate. Therefore, it never got to the president's desk, which we knew, even if it got to the president's desk, it was not going to get signed. But here's the thing, you have to keep on trying. And this is what I would say to my colleagues who would say, oh, what's the use in trying that? We know even if we pass it, it's not going to happen over in the Senate. And then when it gets to the president, he's not going to sign it. I say you never, never, never give up. Because if you keep on saying it, there will be enough pressure from the American people on those legislators who are sitting back and saying, well, there's no use, that you will eventually get something done. I'm from the state of Tennessee. When I went to the General Assembly back when I first ran for the House of Representatives there, we were in the minority. And everybody kept saying, oh, we'll never get in the majority. And I said, if you don't act like the majority, you will never get in the majority. And that's what we have to do, is we have to continue, and you all are from all over the United States. You have to make sure that your representatives, whether they think they can do it right now, whether they think that the Senate is going to pass it or not, you just do it. You have got to keep the conversation alive and keep putting the pressure on. And we did some of that. I mean, I will say I'd have to go back and look at some of the things that we did pass out of the House that were really good. They were not able to get through the Senate, but the pressure has got to continue to be put there, and the pressure cooker, until finally the top comes off of the pot.
I was going to ask you, what difference is the federal appeals court decision going to make? The president is calling you?
The president's calling. The president's calling.
I'm in front of an audience of about 300 people. I told the president, so I'm going to have to call you back. I'll just say I got a 000 number.
Microphone.
I got a 000 number. The only time I've ever gotten that is when it's the president. So this was a state rep from Texas impersonating the president of the United States.
You have the power to get even, don't you?
What are the 5 words that Arkansas politician most dreads hearing?
Are you asking me from Texas?
Well, I'm trying not to say Texas. This guy's from where?
He's from
That's why I'm trying not to say. Let's stay with Arkansas. The 5 words an Arkansas politician most dreads to hear. Will the defendant please rise? Okay. So are we? What difference will the appeals court decision make, do you suspect? Where does this put us?
Are you talking about
Sanctuary cities.
So
It allows the
Second Circuit Court of Appeals.
okay, you're talking about the one that related to the spending. I think it matters a lot because it sends the message that, okay, if you're going to be a sanctuary city, or you're going to ignore federal law as it relates to immigration, which is, we've been told by the Supreme Court that's their responsibility, that there are consequences. There are actually consequences, and if you don't want to hold up your end of the deal, then the federal government doesn't have to give you money. I think that's perfectly appropriate for the federal government to do.
I'm going to stick with the AG for a second. Do you suspect that when it goes to the High Court, the Supreme Court, we'll get that 5-4, or it'll be the other 5-4, if you know what I mean, and I know you do.
So are you asking me whether that goes to the Supreme Court? I don't know. I mean, usually they'll take cases where there's a diversity of opinion in other courts, and I don't know that we've had that exact ruling so far, but it wouldn't surprise me that eventually it goes to the Supreme Court, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a 5-4 decision the way we would hope.
Okay. You think he would go with us?
I do.
And you know who
because
the
I've
who-
watched. I'll give you an example. The travel ban. I mean, we saw that was a similar immigration issue where the president issued a travel ban for terrorist states, and you're going to be surprised by this. Texas stepped in with an amicus brief supporting the president on that. And initially, we were actually alone. And actually, I got a quick story about that. I went on. Have you guys ever heard of MSNBC? Okay, so I went on a Sunday night, and the reason I went on a Sunday night is because I knew none of you guys were watching. And I went on, and I was being interviewed by this guy named Ari, and I was in the studio in Dallas in the dark by myself, and I get on, and Ari, who's also a lawyer, has the Washington Attorney General. He has a clip talking about how crazy Texas is and how we're all alone supporting the president on the travel ban in the Ninth Circuit. And so Ari comes on after they played the clip, and he says, Mr. Attorney General from Texas, don't you feel lonely being the only state supporting the president on the travel ban? And I said, Ari, I'm from a state of 28 million people. I'm never lonely.
You can't say that.
No, we don't have 28 million people.
Right. Okay.
I can't say that.
Right. Congressman, what is this going to make a difference? The decision, in case there's somebody in the audience doesn't know what the appeals court said, it's okay for Trump to do what he said he's doing, and that is to withhold money from sanctuary cities. It seems pretty straightforward. Is it, and do you feel confident that this is going to make a difference?
Well, I sure hope so. I think that the more that we can have the law enforcement and the courts behind the president on obviously what he wants to do to secure our nation, the better off we are. I applaud the president when everyone kept saying he's not going to build that wall. He's not going to build that wall. And he found a way to get money to at least start building the wall. We're nowhere close to where we need to be. But one thing I do worry when the Congress is not doing its job is that the president then has to use an executive order to do what he knows to be right for the American people and for the safety of our country. And I do worry that if we use executive order too much, that we get away from what our constitutional fathers wanted, and that was a balance of power. Because then the balance of power goes more towards the executive branch, and it is not in the congressional area where we know that that is the natural balance there. And so I want Congress to do its work. That way we do have the balance of power. But if it means protecting our country, and the president has the ability to be able to do that through an executive order, then I guess that's the situation that we're in, and we have to move toward. But I want to see Congress do its work, do its job.
If the distinguished Congressman Brooks would address the question of what happens in the highly unlikely event that we get a Democrat in the White House, which Democrat would be the least odious when it comes to this issue?
Last time I saw, all of them raise their hands, okay? Basically, what's the message when they raise their hands on health care for illegal aliens? Everybody in the world who is sick, if you can break into the United States of America, those patsies will pay your bills. And we don't have enough money to do all that. If I could add just another subject, point for a moment that I think is extremely important. The other side wants you to feel guilty for enforcing our laws. We need to make them feel guilty for the damage that they are doing to Americans by disobeying our laws. And that's where our focus needs to be. So these policies we have, they are there because we believe they are collectively in the best interest of our country. And they have been decided on by decades and centuries of laws passed by our United States Congress and signed by our presidents. When we disobey those laws, not only are we undermining our republic, but we are also hurting Americans. I gave those crime statistics. I didn't break it down by ethnicity, but I want to assure you that there are African Americans, Latin Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Caucasian Americans who are victims. The criminals, I don't think they really cared about the ethnicity or skin pigmentation of their victims. And we should not care either when we're addressing this subject. And we have to make sure that we don't fight this fight on their battleground where you can't help but have compassion for the people who are leaving the plight that they're in. And if that is the battleground in the world of politics, the other side wins. We need to talk about the Kate Steinleys. We need to talk about the 2,000 and something people each year who would be alive but for these open borders policies of the Socialist Democrats. We need to talk about the roughly $200 billion a year in net tax losses at the city, county, state, and federal level that could be used for Americans of all stripes, but for the subsidies of illegal alien conduct in America. And by the way, that's money we don't have to borrow to get, can't afford to pay back, and it's a major contributor to our path to a national insolvency and bankruptcy that will do a lot of damage to America if we don't start getting a whole lot better than we've shown ourselves to be in the past. So I appreciate you letting me go off on that tangent, but I wanted to emphasize some of those points.
As if I could have prevented it. How do we do that? How do we win this battle? How do we win the rhetorical battle? Because if we were winning it, we wouldn't be talking about it.
So I'm not sure that we're not starting to make progress, and I think we do it with elections. We have a president that has done more for immigration reform and more for protecting our borders than any president that I know in my lifetime. So the fact that we have a president that is, one, appointing judges that will uphold the law, like our sanctuary city laws and like travel ban and other laws, but also just his effort on, he talks about it. He's not ashamed to talk about it. He's out there talking about it. He's putting money along the border to build the wall. He's putting more border agents down there. We have a president that's actually doing something about it and making progress, whether Congress does or not, and putting money into the problem.
Amen. But are we making the progress that we need to make in order to prevent the kind of thing you were talking about, Congresswoman, which is excessively imperial presidency? There's another way of putting it, right?
Yes, and that is up to the electorate too, to make sure that we're getting good people that are elected that are willing to work with the president and willing to stand up and do what needs to be done. But it is step by step. You know, if I ask you to come up on stage, I have, 4 steps here. It's a lot easier to do that if you do it step by step. But if I ask you to go from here to here, you may need a little help. And that's a lot harder to do. So sometimes it is incremental, and I know that we would rather it just happen all at one time. But with 435 members of the House and then another 100 over in the Senate, that is not an easy thing to do. I always used to tell my constituents when they'd say, why aren't things moving faster? I said, well, let's say you're a family of 5, and it's Friday night, and you all want to go out to dinner. And Dad wants to go to a steakhouse, and Mom likes Chinese, and the oldest child says, well, you know, I'd really rather have pizza. The next one says, I'd really rather not be with any of you here at all. And the other one says, I want to just stay home and play on my computer. Now, just a family of 5 going out to dinner on Friday night is tough. Imagine if you're trying to get something done with that many people. It isn't easy. However, I think we are making progress. And I do think that the president has a big role in that, because he has just said he promised to do this when he was elected, and he is following through on his promise. Isn't that odd that a politician says that they're going to do something and they follow through? But I applaud him for that. And if that's what we have to do now, step by step by step, then let's do it until we can get a majority back in the House of Representatives, and we have the president there, and then we can put pressure on the Senate, which, by the way, I think they should go back to just a majority vote rather than 60, so that we can get those things done in a way and a manner in which it should be done.
I can't tell you how pleased
by
I am
Congress.
that you raised that you pointed to that question in a way, and that is, since everybody here is going to keep everything that happens in this room quiet to himself and herself. If you were with Jared, the president's son-in-law, and the president and a few of the other people you know, and you're just having a private conversation, what would you advise the president to do different from what he's doing now to move us forward on this and other issues?
All right.
You want to get back to me next week?
Yeah,
I understand.
I'll get back to you. Maybe let's go to the other panelists and let me think about that one a little bit. What would I advise him to do that he's not doing now? I think he's doing a pretty darn good job, considering that he doesn't have the support that he needs in both the House and the Senate to get this done.
Now you know what second prize is
No,
like.
I would give him one piece of advice. Win your next election.
Whew, yes, amen.
All right, Mo, it's up to you.
I'd tell him to listen to Steve Miller a lot. Okay? Steve Miller's got it down straight on the seriousness of this situation. I would also ask the president to be more aggressive, even to the point of risking, how should I say it, impeachment? Okay? He's the commander-in-chief. Going back to that invasion provision in the United States Constitution, I would talk about it in that kind of context. And he has an obligation to defend our country from invasions. And if you look at the definition of the word invasion in Webster's dictionary or Black's Law Dictionary, this is an invasion. Those huge tsunamis of caravans coming across our border, what is it if it's not an invasion when they're coming into our country unlawfully? So I'd be much more aggressive. But Diane's got a very valid point. It sure would be a whole lot easier if Congress would help him out with the money that's necessary to secure that border, if Congress would help him out with a better definition of what a refugee is or is not, and when amnesty is there or should not be there, if the United States Congress would help out with border security in a lot of different ways, like by hiring judges who could very quickly rule on whether illegal aliens are entitled to stay in the United States of America or should be deported. But he's not going to get that help from the United States Congress as long as you've got so many leftists who are elected to the House and the Senate and so many people who are beholden out of a sense of greed and self-entitlement to those special interest groups that profit from the importation of that cheap foreign labor. So we got a double whammy, us normal citizens, that we have to overcome on the left and on the right. Please rise to the challenge because America needs your help.
What did I tell you how hard it is to get him to speak his mind? We've got a few minutes left, and I'd like to open the questions to the audience. Who's got a really great question? A really great question. Okay, the one is standing. You. Thank you. You, yes. Yellow jersey. Question, please. Quick question. We got to move on if you can't ask the quick question. I'm sorry, we got to move. Question.
As congressmen, are you aware that when people are denied political asylum, nothing happens to them? I have a friend, an asylum judge in Miami. After he denies political asylum, nothing happens to them. They just go back home, they go about their lives, and nothing happens to them. So I was wondering if you could look into that, maybe rectify that.
Thank you. What's your response?
My understanding is if the country will not take them back, then they are here. And you're right. That's a real problem if the country won't take them back.
I'd use a parachute.
Cap.
Yes, sir. Retired lieutenant colonel, spent a lot of time fighting foreign borders. Please tell me, because I know you speak your mind, why we couldn't get the wall built and why we couldn't get this bill done prior to tax reform where you had 2 years to do it. Please be as honest as you can.
Sure, because we have this rule in the United States Senate that relates to filibusters, and you need 60 votes. And that meant that the Democrats could stop everything we wanted to do as long as you adhere to the 60 vote rule. I strongly encouraged our Kentucky senator, y'all know who I'm talking about, right? Oh, in case you don't, Mitch McConnell,
It's all off the record.
to get rid of the 60 vote rule while we had the House and the Senate and the presidency so we could make the kind of constructive changes that are necessary to save our country. But unfortunately, he put tradition above the United States, in my judgment. But we could have done it over that 2-year period of time if we had had Mitch McConnell and the other senators understand what the stakes are at this particular pivot point in the history of our country.
He had to say Mitch McConnell. The lady with the beautiful hand. You.
I have a question for the audience. I would love to know how many of you plan to work on March 3rd, Election Day, at your polling locations? Because this is do or die. How many of you are planning to work the election? Raise your hand, please. That's the issue. We have Democrats that show up to work all the polls and intimidate our own people. And we don't show up to work our polls. They don't have jobs. We're begging.
Thank you. I hate to do 2 women in a row, but I'm going to do it. Yes.
You mentioned Jared Kushner. I just have a question. My understanding is we're walking back on mandatory E-Verify, and that's to get in alignment with the plan that's coming out for Jared Kushner. Can you guys comment on that? Because I think mandatory E-Verify is a very important initiative.
I'm not sure where E-Verify is going right now, particularly in this United States Congress, and that's a major issue. But let's be real clear. A lot of illegal aliens come to America illegally in order to get a job. And if they can't get a job, they will self-deport. By not all of them, but a large number of them. And that really puts the home builders, the agricultural interests, the Chamber of Commerce types that want to hire all this illegal alien labor, that puts them in a very difficult spot if you have to have E-Verify where they can't hold up their hands and say, I didn't know. Well, if you have E-Verify, they did know. And so E-Verify is an essential part of solving the problem of border insecurity, illegal aliens in our country, both the ones that come across the border, and as Diane pointed out, the visa overstays.
Not three ladies in a row. The gentleman in the second row, the blue shirt. Right? Yes, you.
I think that the problem with the wall is we can't get it funded, right? Because it's already been approved. Why can't we privately fund the wall?
Well,
Woohoo, that was my bill. That was my bill. Just send money in, send money in. Everybody laughed. Amen. I agree with you totally.
And sell the energy. I have one thing I would like the president to do that you guys didn't mention. Is he made himself famous firing people. I would fire half the people in the federal government.
Well,
Woohoo, I'm with you there too.
all right. The lady, no, the lady that wanted, yes, thank you.
If I can't answer her, I'm married to an El Salvadorian, and I wanted you to know that they come here and get a TIN number, tax identification number, and that is not part of E-Verify. So there is no E-Verify going on with them. Okay? My husband is a hardcore, he's Latino, he's a hardcore Trump supporter and a conservative, and they are terrified of the new group that's coming here. They don't want them here. They don't talk with them. They don't deal with illegal aliens that come here. People who are born here, who are Latino, they do not associate with that group coming here at all.
Thank you. Thank you.
A lot of the conversations about illegal immigration, is there any efforts being devoted to studying the effects of legal immigration? I get that we want legal immigrants to come here, but how are legal guest worker visas really working out, like the H-1B or the OPT work permits for F-1 international students who are displacing American workers in large numbers? And now we have Senator Mike Lee trying to push this bill next week to remove country cap quotas for green cards so it rewards big tech. Is there any conversation being spoken about legal?
Well, I have focused on illegal immigration because I think the clarity is much better. When you talk about lawful immigration, the economic principles are the same. The more you artificially inflate the labor supply, then the cheaper that labor is, and the less American workers get in those types of jobs. If you're blue collar, going back to George Borjas, a Harvard economist, roughly $2,000 suppression of wages. So the economic principle is the same regardless of whether they're legal or illegal. Now, my community, y'all may not realize that, but we have one of the smartest places in the world in Huntsville, Alabama. We have more engineers per capita than any place in the United States. Scientists, we're the birthplace of America's space program. All those gee-whiz bang weapons you see, we're the ones that invent them or contract them out to be invented. And when you start talking about lawful immigration, that's where you hit the white-collar workers. Okay, where suddenly middle-class white-collar workers are seeing their wages suppressed by foreigners who are here lawfully now, but they're willing to work for a whole lot less because they're so willing to come to the United States of America. So the economic principles are the same, and we have to reach a balance on how we're going to handle that without adversely affecting the ability of Americans to be able to take care of their families like we wish. And what's the best indicator of how bad we're doing right now in balancing? Bernie Sanders is getting a lot of votes as a socialist because people aren't getting the wages they used to be able to get half a century ago when you did not have this huge surge in the labor supply. And so this is a major contributor from an economic standpoint to people opting for socialism because they feel that this wage suppression that is taking place is denying them the American dream.
Take this with you. This man has just said the most important thing said at this panel, because Bernie is a threat for the reason that you just said. And I'm going to call on you, but I'm going to pretend I'm you because I'm going to ask a question. No, you go ahead and ask your question, then I'll ask the congressman. Go ahead. Yes.
What can Republicans do better regarding with messaging, right? Some of the people that you represent should be the best messengers for whatever you want to pass. A good example, if you put Nancy Pelosi on camera with the Border Patrol Sector Chief of San Diego, that whole talking point about war zone work is not going to fly. Agent assault goes down 80%. How can you do better with messaging to make sure that the talking points
Yeah, I'm going to just say this really quickly because I know we're running out of time. One of the things that is different between the Democrats and the Republicans is that the Democrats will follow Nancy Pelosi like a sheep. Now, I don't care if it gets on the news or not. She knows I've said this before. We have independent agents when we talk about Republicans. And we have tried through conferences, we'll get together and we'll say, okay, this is what everybody's going to say. And they walk out of the room, and it's kind of like going to a Subway franchise conference where you all learn how to make the Subway the same way, and then you get back to your shop and you just make whatever. That's the problem with the Republicans, and it's not that it's bad that everybody has their own way of thinking. It's just getting them to stay on track about what to say. And we've had that problem, and it's been something that I've talked about when I was still there and in conference, that we've got to get simple phrases and say them over and over and over and over, because it takes 7 times before somebody will remember something. And if we could do that, we could win the messaging.
Diane Black, that was perfect. I'm going to wind up the whole meeting with this last question. That is, why is it that the temporary or acting chief of staff to the President of the United States said recently that this country is starving for workers? We need more workers. We got to have more immigrant workers. What?
Yeah, I know Mick Mulvaney really well. We came to Congress together. I love him like a brother, but we are polar opposites when it comes to border security. Okay, he would have been one of the guys, if he'd been in the Senate, who would have made the Gang of 8, the Gang of 9 amnesty bill. He just has a different viewpoint on all of this. Again, he's a super guy. He's honorable. He's sharp. But he's consistent with the split we have within the Republican
How
ranks.
sharp could it be not to understand basic economics and the law of supply and demand?
Well, he has an economics background.
I know. He was OMB director, as I recall.
He and I agree on most everything except for the border security issue. And when I would sit on the House floor and speak with him, we just would not make progress on reaching an agreement that we need to do more to protect lawful immigrants who are already here, and most importantly, American families that are already here, by raising their wages and allowing them to compete for better jobs.
All right. Let's wrap this up by saying we are deeply appreciative that we got 3 of the smartest people in government to come to this event. Bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Diane.